Two officers escorted a composed black man into the courtroom, snickering at his name and mocking his silence, until he calmly placed an FBI badge on the judge's bench and turned the entire room upside down. When the bailiff called for Leonard Briggs, he barely lifted his eyes, and the name echoed faintly through the chamber. No one responded until a tall, clean-cut black man in a slightly rumpled gray suit rose quietly from the back pew and made his way toward the front. His walk was slow and composed, with no sense of urgency. No legal team, no documents, no assistants, just him. Two officers in uniform, sitting near the rear, leaned toward each other. One asked in a hushed tone, "Is that him?" "Has to be. Look at him," the other replied, smirking. Probably another one of those self-proclaimed legal experts who claim the law doesn't apply to them. They laughed under their breath, just loud enough to draw a few curious glances. Leonard's expression didn't change. His face was still unreadable, like he'd seen all this before. The judge, a white man with thinning hair and a voice reminiscent of small-town radio, adjusted his glasses and reviewed the case file in front of him. "Mr. Briggs," he began while flipping pages, "you're being charged with noncompliance during a traffic stop. Is that accurate?" Leonard responded calmly. "That's what's on the report. And you've chosen not to bring legal representation today? I don't require one." More laughter followed from the back of the room. The judge glanced briefly at the officers, but let it pass. The air in the courtroom was taut, not explosive, but dense enough that everyone felt it. The judge went on. "This seems like a minor offense, so let's move quickly. Mr. Briggs, do you have anything to say before we proceed?" Leonard took a step forward and reached slowly into his coat. One officer in the back tensed, shifting in his seat and instinctively touching his sidearm. Leonard paused, then carefully drew a slim badge from his coat and laid it at the edge of the judge's bench. "My name is Leonard D. Briggs," he said with a steady, even voice. "I serve as Director of Internal Affairs for the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room froze. Total silence. The judge stared at the badge in disbelief. His mouth opened, then closed again without saying a word. The officer who had partially risen slowly eased back into his chair, visibly stunned. His partner looked at Leonard, as if he had witnessed something impossible. "You're with the FBI?" the judge finally asked. Leonard didn't move. "Internal Affairs," he clarified. "I oversee investigations into officer misconduct throughout the southeastern region, including departments known to deactivate body cameras during stops." The only sounds that followed were the faint rustle of paper, a single cough, and the weight of realization settling over the room. The judge cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair, his posture shifting as he considered the weight of the moment. "Would you be willing to step into my chambers for a private conversation, Mr. Briggs?" Leonard calmly shook his head. "I'd rather everything remain public, fully documented, transparent." One of the officers stood slowly, his voice unsteady. We didn't know who he was." The words barely left his lips. Leonard turned to face them, not with anger, but with quiet attention. Observing, measuring. "You never asked," he said plainly. But the silence that followed was short-lived because news travels fast behind closed doors, and this time it wasn't stopping until it reached the highest levels. It was just past 10:30 p.m. when Leonard exited Highway 45 near Biloxi, Mississippi. He'd spent the entire day on the road, visiting various precincts across the Gulf region. Departments flagged for irregularities in their reports, questionable use of force records, and, most recently, an unusual number of non-functioning body cameras. His rental car was a standard silver Toyota Camry. Unremarkable, unassuming, chosen deliberately. Leonard preferred to operate without drawing attention, relying on subtlety over authority. That night, he was heading to a modest motel on Bayou View Drive when the flashing red and blue lights appeared behind him. With a quiet sigh, he eased the vehicle to the side of the road. In his mirror, he saw two officers exit their patrol car, both white in their 30s. One had a shaved head and already had his flashlight drawn. They didn't take their time. The bald officer rapped loudly on the driver's side window. "License and registration." Leonard lowered the window halfway. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" "License," The officer repeated, this time with more edge. You failed to signal during your last lane change. Leonard glanced at his rearview mirror, checking the dash cam. I'm fairly certain I did. Got something to hide? The second officer asked, now at the passenger side. Leonard remained calm. No, but I'd like to know if this is a routine stop or something more. That didn't sit well. The bald officer leaned in closer. Are you giving me a hard time? Step out of the car. I haven't refused anything, Leonard replied. I just asked a question. Out. Now. The officer barked. Leonard didn't move. Instead, he handed over his driver's license. It read Leonard Briggs. No mention of the FBI. Just a clean, legitimate ID from Montgomery, Alabama. Everything in order. Yet that still wasn't enough. Where are you headed? The officer asked. Can't say. Can't. Or won't. The officer pressed. Leonard held his gaze, steady and unwavering. Federal protocol. That was all Leonard said. Just 2 words, but they lit a fuse. The officer's face tightened instantly. What's that supposed to mean? He barked. You think you're above the law now? Leonard stayed silent. The second officer didn't wait. He swung the passenger door open and shouted for him to step out immediately. Leonard's voice remained composed. This stop is no longer lawful. But they had no interest in that. They yanked him from the car with force, jerking his arm and slamming him onto the pavement. His back pressed against the gravel, knees pinning him down. One officer swore loudly while the other called it in as refusal to comply. Leonard didn't shout or resist. He just looked straight ahead, absorbing every word they said, imprinting every detail into memory. What they didn't know was that, from the moment those flashing lights first appeared behind him, Leonard had discreetly activated a small audio recorder hidden in his coat. It was second nature by now, born from too many years of knowing how quickly things could escalate, especially for someone who looked like him, particularly in places like this. By the time they got him to the station, a sloppy report had already been written. It painted him as uncooperative and verbally aggressive, conveniently leaving out the questions they asked, the force they used, and the fact there was no dash or body cam footage to review. When Leonard requested the badge number of the arresting officer, all he got was a cold stare and a smug reply. Don't worry, you'll have time for questions in court. They threw him into a holding cell with no call, no opportunity to speak with anyone in charge, just a dim hallway, a flickering light overhead, and the mocking grin of a man who believed he had just won. But he hadn't, not even close, because the courtroom they dragged Leonard into wasn't going to be where he answered to charges. It was where the real reckoning would begin. For them. After Leonard placed his credentials on the judge's bench, the room didn't just go silent, it froze. Laughter from the back row vanished instantly. The officer with the shaved head now sat motionless, eyes flicking from Leonard to the badge as if trying to wake from a nightmare. The judge cleared his throat again, but the confidence in his voice had vanished. Mr. Briggs, are you saying you're with the FBI? Leonard held his gaze steady. I'm not saying it. I am. He nodded toward the badge. You can confirm it through Director Travis McCall's office or directly with the Office of Inspector General in Washington. A clerk, Arlene, a veteran with 3 decades in that courthouse and a sharp eye for drama, stood from her desk. Your Honor, would you like me to place the call? Yes, please, the judge responded, perhaps a little too quickly. Leonard stepped back slightly to give them space. Every person in that room remained frozen. No one blinked. Even a child in the gallery had gone completely still. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. One of the officers leaned toward the other and whispered, "This can't be real." But the other looked at Leonard's badge, then his ID, and shook his head slightly. That badge looks legit. That ID too. If this is real, then we're in serious trouble. Leonard heard every word but didn't respond. His eyes remained locked on the judge, who now seemed noticeably smaller behind the weight of the bench. The clerk returned after 5 minutes, holding a small notepad, chewing the inside of her cheek. Confirmed, she said flatly, not even glancing at the officers. He's FBI, Internal Affairs, Southeastern Division. 27 years in service. Everything checks out. The room froze again, but this time the silence wasn't laced with mockery. It was thick with discomfort. The judge averted his eyes. The officer's breathing grew shallow. The prosecutor stared at nothing. Leonard finally spoke, his voice composed. I didn't come here to cause a disruption. I didn't even come to file a formal complaint. I was in transit, working a low-profile assignment involving departments under current review. I didn't show my credentials because I wasn't required to. I handed over my license, stayed calm, and followed protocol. Though his voice never rose, it commanded the room. I was forcefully removed from my car, pinned to the ground, and held for hours without justification. My rights were dismissed, but every word was recorded, and I'm fully aware of the procedural violations committed. The judge leaned back, fingers laced tightly. Mr. Briggs, Leonard didn't let him finish. I'm not here for an apology. I'm requesting all charges against me be dropped immediately and that both officers be placed on temporary administrative leave, pending a federal investigation. The prosecutor opened his mouth, but the judge raised his hand to stop him. Granted, the officers were visibly shocked. You're suspending us? Just like that? The bald one shouted. The judge said nothing. Leonard turned toward them. This was never about me, he said. This is about everyone you've treated like they were invisible. Every citizen who didn't have a badge to flash. I do. And still, I ended up face down in the dirt. One officer stepped forward. Look, we didn't know who you were. If we had, Leonard raised a hand to silence him. That's the issue. But he wasn't finished. Not even close. Because while the badge may have silenced the courtroom, the real truth was still buried beneath paperwork, false statements, and missing footage that conveniently didn't exist. The courtroom cleared quickly. People left like they'd just witnessed a nuclear reaction. The two officers stood near the exit, pale and speechless. No phones in hand. No excuses. Just stunned realization. Outside, the thick Mississippi air clung to everything. Leonard walked directly to his rental car, sat behind the wheel, and finally let out a long, steady breath. There was no satisfaction in moments like these. Only weight, because they always meant someone failed again. Just down the road, Sheriff Ricky Halburn sat at his desk when the call came through. FBI? He repeated, holding the phone against his shoulder. That guy was with the FBI? His deputy, Tamara Wells, stood quietly nearby, arms crossed, face unreadable. She'd seen the arrest report, and something about it had always fell off. Yes, sir, the voice on the other end replied. Leonard Briggs. Internal Affairs. Ricky rubbed his forehead in frustration. You're telling me two of my guys arrested a federal investigator and dragged him into court without verifying a damn thing? Yes, sir. He slammed the receiver down and turned to Tamara. Why the hell didn't anyone tell me he was FBI? She arched a brow. Maybe because he wasn't treated like he was. Back at the courthouse, the judge convened a closed-door meeting. No transcripts, no recordings, only quiet voices behind thick wooden walls. Faces flushed with concern, and unease spread as the thought of media coverage loomed. Meanwhile, Leonard was already at his motel, seated on the edge of the bed with his laptop open, a secure call, line humming softly. The voice on the other end was steady and to the point. You okay? I'm good, Leonard replied. But they're not. He began detailing the encounter. The stop, the aggression, the mysteriously inactive body cameras, the overnight detention. A sigh came from the other side of the call. Is this the first incident tied to that department? No, Leonard answered. We've had 3 prior complaints over the past year and a half. All of them dropped. One complainant even relocated out of state. Then it's time. Make the inspection official. Leonard nodded instinctively, even though the other man couldn't see it. Should I keep it low profile? Not anymore. Later that day, Officer Curtis Dell, the one with the shaved head, returned to the station trying to carry himself casually. But it was obvious something had changed. His forced demeanor, his avoidance of Tamara's eyes, the stiffness in his walk. Everyone noticed. He knocked on the sheriff's office door. Got a second? Ricky didn't even look up. Make it quick. Curtis stepped in. Look, I didn't realize who he was. If I had, Ricky cut him off. I don't care if he was a sanitation worker or a ghost. He never raised his voice, never made a threat, never acted aggressively. And you still brought him in like a common criminal. Curtis entered the room fully. I panicked. He was vague. kept mentioning federal procedures. We've seen fake agents before, guys pretending to be with the feds. Ricky stared him down. And when he handed you a legitimate license, what did you do? Toss it aside? Curtis had no reply. Ricky leaned forward. Do you even grasp what happens if justice sends investigators here? Curtis looked down, shame creeping into his face. I messed up. Tamara, who had quietly entered and stood listening, crossed her arms tightly. You didn't just mess up, you lit us up like a flare. And maybe that's overdue. Curtis turned to her, stunned. You can't be serious. Tamara didn't flinch. I'm tired of reading incident reports that don't match the footage. I'm tired of watching people leave this building worse off than when they arrived. Ricky didn't say anything. He sat in silence, jaw clenched, holding his phone as if weighing everything that was about to unravel. But whatever they feared hadn't even scratched the surface of what Leonard was now staring at on his laptop. A document full of names, dates, and recurring red flags going back several years. Sitting at the desk in his motel room, Leonard's fingers moved smoothly over the keyboard. His eyes were locked in, rarely blinking. He wasn't driven by anger, emotion clouded judgment. Instead, he focused on facts, timelines, patterns. He opened the department's official online portal and submitted a formal request for the body cam footage from the night of his arrest. Everything was precise, time-stamped, and professionally worded. He didn't need to wait long. Within an hour, a response came. Abrupt, defensive. The message read that the body cam footage from May 14th was unavailable due to a technical issue. An internal review of maintenance records was underway to identify the cause. Leonard leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. Not quite a sigh, but a recognition of a pattern he'd seen too many times. Another data point in a file that was expanding by the minute. He contacted the DOJ's Regional Evidence Unit and asked for a review of the department's body cam software logs. 10 minutes later, he had what he needed. They've had 6 reported malfunctions in under a year, the analyst explained. And every instance happened during encounters with Black or Latino individuals. None occurred during standard training or when dealing with white motorists. Leonard didn't react. He just kept typing. At the department, pressure was mounting. Officer Dell sat silently at his desk, eyes fixed on his monitor, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Across the room, Tamara sifted through old reports, opening files that hadn't been viewed in years. One case from December stood out. A young man stopped near his home, claimed excessive force, submitted a complaint. The body cam had failed. Another case surfaced, then another. Same pattern. Tamara narrowed her eyes. They really believed no one would catch on, she muttered. Meanwhile, Brian, the department's IT technician who generally avoided involvement in internal drama, received a quiet message on the internal chat. It asked him to check the system logs for May 14th, specifically who had accessed the files tied to Leonard Briggs before they went missing. Brian hesitated, but curiosity overtook caution. He ran the trace. The answer was immediate. Dell. Not once, but twice. Once just hours after the incident, and again the next morning. Logs were wiped. Review flags bypassed. Brian stared at the results, then printed them out, slid the pages into an envelope, and walked them over to Tamara. No emails. No attachments. She opened the packet, read the printout, and her expression hardened. Thanks, she said softly. Brian gave no response. He turned and walked away in silence. The following morning, when Leonard arrived at the department in the same suit as the day before, holding a slender manila folder, the officer at the front desk went pale. Agent Briggs, the man stuttered. We didn't expect you. I'm not here to escalate anything, Leonard said. I'm here to confirm patterns. Without waiting for clearance, he made his way toward the operations section. Everyone moved aside. Reaching the sheriff's office, he knocked once and entered. Ricky looked up, visibly tired. I take it you saw our message. Leonard placed the folder on the desk. I also reviewed the system access logs. Ricky didn't reach for it. Someone accessed the internal records, Leonard said steadily, and removed the camera data manually. After the arrest. Before court. Want to guess who it was? Ricky rubbed his eyes. We're in the process of investigating. No, Leonardo Riplaiv. Calm but firm. You're not investigating. I am. You're not conducting the investigation. I am. Leonard turned to exit, but paused at the doorway. I recommend having Officer Dell's badge and service weapon ready by close of business. Internal Affairs will be on site within days. Ricky offered no pushback. He didn't even raise his eyes. As Leonard stepped into the hallway, he knew full well Dell wasn't the only one whose actions had left a digital trail. And the scope of the inquiry had expanded. It was no longer limited to a single night, but to an entire structure built on concealment. By Wednesday morning, 2 unmarked black SUVs rolled quietly into the rear lot of the Jefferson County Police Department. No sit-ins, no scene, just a quiet, calculated presence. Leonard stepped out first, followed by 2 agents from Washington. Grace Mendoza, a policy compliance strategist with an unshakable presence, and Nathan Cole, a digital forensics expert who rarely spoke unless necessary. Their goal wasn't disruption, it was clarity. Inside, the tone had shifted. Officers who had once moved with confidence now kept to themselves. Ricky Halburn hadn't had a full night's sleep in days. The only voices that carried through the building were Leonard's and his team's. Grace immediately took charge of records, requesting everything from disciplinary actions and traffic stop data to personnel reviews and internal affairs documentation, anything that left a trace. Nathan made his way to the server room alongside Brian, the IT technician, who gave him access without hesitation. Leonard sat down with Tamara in a quiet back office. Her laptop was filled with case files, reports, documents, timelines. Her face was tense, her attention fixed. "These are nearly identical," she said. "Drivers pulled over, accusations of aggression, cameras always off, vague write-ups, no follow-through." Leonard nodded. "This isn't just about a few poor choices. It's about an entire system. What goes unnoticed? What gets quietly erased? What others come to accept as normal?" She turned her laptop toward him. "Here's one. May of last year. Man stopped after leaving work. No ticket. No arrest. Just a report that says he was non-compliant." Leonard skimmed it. The phrasing was the same in every case. A few doors down, Grace walked straight into the sheriff's office without asking. "I need the department's use of force training protocols, escalation procedures, and camera usage guidelines." Ricky looked like he wanted to push back, but he didn't. He pointed to a filing cabinet. Grace opened it, scanned the documents, and frowned. "These haven't been updated in 4 years." Ricky didn't respond. Meanwhile, Nathan was working quickly. Systems were being mirrored. Camera data was retrieved. Deleted files reconstructed from backups most officers didn't even know existed. When he uncovered 2 incomplete video files, he flagged them immediately. One included audio from a patrol car's onboard microphone. The clip was short, but clear enough. Leonard entered as Nathan handed over the headset. He listened. The audio captured a voice asking where the driver was going. The response, "Can't say." The escalation, a door flung open, a struggle, gravel scraping, a grunt. Leonard removed the headset. "This will do." He went directly to Ricky's office, where Grace was still reviewing documents. "We're issuing a compliance freeze," Leonard said. "No officer from this department will participate in field work until our review is finished." Ricky leaned forward. "You're grounding us?" "Temporarily," Leonard confirmed. "Dispatch stays active for emergencies, but effective immediately. This department falls under federal oversight." Ricky exhaled slowly. "You realize what this means for us?" Leonard didn't react. "You realize what the cost of inaction has already been." As he walked out, the weight of his presence lingered. Downstairs, the atmosphere was thick. Officers, even those who had never spoken to him before, turned their eyes away. At the foot of the stairs, Tamara approached. "I went through the complaint archives," she said. "There's a pattern in how they were dismissed. Most didn't involve any interviews at all." Leonard raised a brow. "Who authorized them?" She handed over a document. Dell's name kept showing up. Leonard folded the paper and placed it in his jacket. "Good work," he said. Tamara looked unsure. "Do you believe this will change anything?" Leonard paused before stepping outside. "That depends. Do you?" But change wouldn't come from paper trails alone. It would come from how the town responded once the truth was out. And by the end of the week, They would have no option but to face it. By Friday, the news had moved beyond local government buildings. Small media outlets ran early pieces, brief, speculative. An FBI official wrongfully detained. Then the audio clip surfaced, pulled from the patrol car mic distorted, but unmistakable, followed by one phrase that cut through everything. Federal protocol. That sentence rippled through neighborhoods, played in diners, and echoed in family conversations. It stopped being just a line. It became a demand for clarity. What actually happened? At the Oakland Cafe, a group of older men leaned close over their coffee cups, debating in hushed tones. I'm telling you, they stopped that man without cause. Treated him like any other person they thought they could intimidate. But if he didn't show his badge, he didn't have to. His license was valid. And even if it hadn't been, that's not how you handle a person. Identity shouldn't decide dignity. On the other side of town, inside a modest community center, a group of parents gathered after school ended. Nothing formal, just fatigue, exhausted from the constant need to coach their kids on how to behave during police encounters. Worn out from reminding them that manners and respect aren't always a shield. By evening, a town hall meeting had been called. On short notice, the building was full. Tension buzzed through the crowd. Some came angry, some uncertain, others simply hoping to understand. At the podium stood Mayor Harold Lanning, hands unsteady. We're aware of the federal inquiry, he said. We're working with investigators, and we will begin making adjustments. In the back of the room, Felicia Green rose to speak. Her son had filed a formal complaint 2 years ago, which had been ignored. Will you be reopening the old files? She asked, her voice unwavering. We're reviewing our options, the mayor replied. No, she said. Don't review. Take action. Her words hung in the air. The silence that followed wasn't passive. It carried weight. Leonard stood against the wall, arms folded. He hadn't come to talk. He was there to absorb. Tamara entered partway through and moved beside him. I didn't expect this kind of turnout, she whispered. Leonard's gaze remained steady. They always come, he said, when the silence finally loses its grip. One voice at a time, people stepped forward to speak. A teenage boy shared how he'd been stopped while walking home after football practice. A single mother recounted being pulled over twice in the same week, both times being asked if the car she was driving was really hers. Then, an elderly man stepped forward with a memory few had ever heard. Back in 1989, he'd been stopped, handcuffed, and then released without a word. No explicación. Just gone. None of these experiences had ever reached the public before, but that night, the room listened without interruption. Then, unexpectedly, Sheriff Ricky made his way to the microphone. The atmosphere shifted. He looked tired, more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen him. I've served in law enforcement for 31 years, he began, and I can't stand here and pretend I haven't let some of you down. He stopped, his gaze drifting to Leonard. We didn't know who Mr. Briggs was, and that's not the issue. The issue is that we didn't care who any of you were. That's my responsibility. A few people murmured. Some nodded. We're going to reopen those previously dismissed complaints, he added. We'll be cooperating with federal oversight, and every individual tied to this pattern will be held accountable, including myself. Someone near the front called out, talk doesn't mean much. Ricky didn't flinch. Then hold me to it. Leonard remained silent. Tamara looked his way. You trust him? I trust what this room just became, Leonard answered. After the meeting ended, people didn't rush out. They stayed in groups, speaking quietly, processing. It wasn't the end, not even close. But something had shifted, and once it shifts, you can't put it back. Still, accountability without consequence is hollow. Leonard had one more meeting lined up to make sure that part wouldn't be ignored. Monday morning, Leonard walked up the steps of City Hall, a file in one hand, coffee in the other. He had a scheduled private session with the mayor. But when he entered, 2 others were already inside. Tamara, now officially appointed as the liaison for federal oversight, and Grace Mendoza, sitting beside her with a folder resting in front of her. The mayor looked up. Wasn't expecting a full house, he said, offering a tight smile. Leonard didn't return it. He placed the folder on the table and opened it. Preliminary findings, he stated. 5 verified breaches of protocol, 3 instances of fabricated reports, 2 cases involving tampered body cam footage, and 1 direct attempt to block a federal investigation. The mayor's fingers tightened slightly. "So you're recommending charges?" Leonard waited a moment, then glanced at Grace, who gave a small nod. "We're recommending a complete audit of personnel," she replied, starting immediately. "And that includes terminating Officer Curtis Dell." The mayor sighed. "You're asking me to let go one of our most experienced officers. We're asking you to choose integrity over familiarity," Leonard said. Tamara leaned in. "We're asking if you'll stand with someone who manipulated records, or with the citizens who just asked you for justice." The mayor lowered his eyes to the table. There was no simple exit this time. No press release would undo what had been acknowledged publicly. No silent suspension would meet the gravity of what was now exposed. After a long pause, he nodded. "I'll sign the termination letter today." Leonard closed the folder and rose from his chair. "We'll be watching. Any attempt to stall or interfere from here on out escalates to Washington." The meeting ended without ceremony, but the tension remained in the air as Leonard stepped outside. He didn't return directly to his car. He walked through the city square instead. Life was going on. People out shopping, kids laughing, residents pretending things were as they'd always been. At the corner, he noticed a few students gathered, and among them, a boy in a blue hoodie caught Leonard's eye and offered a subtle nod. It wasn't a fearful one. It carried acknowledgement, maybe even admiration. Leonard responded with a slight nod of his own and continued walking. Meanwhile, back at the station, Officer Dell was summoned to Ricky's office. There were no explanations, no arguments, just a signed document from the mayor stating the termination was effective immediately. Dell didn't protest. He looked at the paper, then at Ricky. "That's it?" he asked. Ricky looked back. "You think it should be anything else?" Dell's voice trembled. "I believed I was doing what I thought was right. I didn't know." "No, you didn't care," Ricky replied. "That's what cost you." Dell left through the back exit. No one saw him again that day. Tamara stood quietly in the hall, watching as the environment around her began to shift. Some seemed relieved. Others wore frustration. But the shift was underway. Leonard came back later that evening to finish the final step, meeting with the mayor, the sheriff, and DOJ representatives to start building new guidelines for the department. These included mandatory protocol reviews, independent body cam checks, and a system for public accountability. There were no celebrations, no speeches, just action. Afterward, with the sun low in the sky, Leonard made one last call. His voice was tired but firm. "Send me the next location," he said. A pause, then confirmation. "Already?" the voice asked. "Yes," he replied. "Already." But before packing up, he took a moment to sit and think, not about his rank or his title, but about how easily people forget that true respect isn't tied to appearance or authority. It's revealed in the quiet moments, in how we treat others when there's no spotlight. Often, the real lesson is found not in loud confrontations, but in the silence that follows, when people stop laughing, when a town stops pretending nothing's wrong. Leonard didn't need to give a speech or chase headlines. What mattered was what people did once someone finally challenged the silence. Back at the motel, Leonard sat at the edge of his bed, shoes still on, phone buzzing with follow-up messages from DC. He silenced them, not out of defiance, just to reclaim a breath. A second to remember why all of this still mattered. It wasn't about justice for himself. It was for the teen walking home who couldn't understand why he was searched. For the mother stopped twice in a week, her child crying in the back seat while her car was emptied without cause. For the older man who never told a soul that officers slammed him against a car in '89 over a minor traffic mistake. They never got to say they worked for the FBI. They didn't have a recorder tucked in a coat pocket. Most just went home in silence, or didn't. Leonard's role in court wasn't about power. It was about using it with precision, not ego. True respect doesn't shout. It isn't earned with uniforms or job titles. It's in choosing to see someone's worth before judging them. They laughed when Leonard entered that courtroom, not because of who he was, but because of what they thought he wasn't. That moment didn't define Leonard. It reflected their own failures. What followed wasn't just an investigation. It was a reflection, forcing the town, the system, and everyone involved to look in the mirror. You don't fix broken institutions by pretending they work. You repair them by acknowledging hard truths, holding wrongdoers accountable, and making sure no voice is lost to a dusty file labeled unfounded. So if you've ever been overlooked or dismissed, remember, your stillness isn't weakness. Your composure isn't surrender. Sometimes, the quietest one in the room carries the most truth. And if ever given the chance to speak for yourself or someone who can't, don't waste it. A badge doesn't define someone. Actions do. Leonard Briggs didn't set out to be a hero. He simply did the job with integrity. And in a world that often forgets what that means, that can be enough. If this story moved you even slightly, don't let it stop here. Share it. Start a conversation. Challenge your community to aim higher. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, because stories like this, they're not just narratives. They're reminders, and we need more of them.